Hello, I'm Jenny Levine with Durham County Library. Today is October 29th, 2020. Welcome to the second installment of Meet the Librarian. Today's guest is Courtney Bippley, reference librarian at Durham Tech. We are going to be talking about her experience starting a podcast. Welcome, Courtney, and thank you for being here. I am excited to hear what you have learned about podcasting. Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm excited to share it. I have learned a lot, and I still have a lot to learn. So it's definitely one of those things where the more you learn, the more questions you have, the more you realize how in the weeds you are. But yeah, so I started a podcast. We've only had one published episode so far, so it's a baby podcast, brand new. And the next episode should be published next week. Cross my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Due to it might be delayed due to COVID related tech issues. But it's been a really great experience so far, and I've gotten a lot of support for the podcast from the director of the library, Julie Humphrey, and from the college in general. The marketing department has been great to me, giving me a pretty logo and putting my podcast on the library webpage and all of that. So I've been really grateful.
That is awesome. And that first one was about early voting, right? And how did you select that topic?
Well, when I was planning the podcast, that was not going to be the first one. However, when I looked at the schedule, early voting was going to end, and I really wanted to do a voting related podcast. And so it was going to be now or never, because it's obviously critically important, and Durham Tech is an early voting site, which potentially not that many people know. So if we wanted to get the word out there, that was the opportunity.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're a voting site here at Durham County Library. It's been great to see the turnout, and you had a lot of great information on that podcast. And tell me something about the equipment that you used.
So the equipment that we bought for the podcast was two microphones that are Samson Q2 microphones. They are pretty good. There are a lot of when you go and start researching microphones, you're going to find a lot of information because apparently microphones are like a thing. They are a thing, and you can get way in the weeds with microphones. So when I have my microphone set up, people are like, "Oh, you look so professional," and I'm like, "No, no, no, no. At this price point, this is an amateur, just getting started microphone." Um, so the gold star microphone for podcast is the Yeti microphone, the Yeti Blue, I think. But we did not buy that because it's twice as much as the one we bought. And we had to buy two of them.
So these
So,
computers get attached to your, I'm sorry, microphones get attached to your computers?
yes, I bought USB microphones. So they plug directly into my computer.
Oh, okay.
And it's been working great. I have been pleased with the sound quality. Haven't received any complaints. And they came with pop filters, that foam thing that goes on the microphone, and they came with shock mounts, which basically holds the microphone so that, if you bump the desk, it won't, you know, mess it up.
Wow. So in addition to that, you have, I guess, software? Is that what runs the podcast or records it?
I am using Audacity, which is open source free software for audio editing. And I've been very pleased with it. It's really intimidating looking because it's just this window full of waveforms and buttons. And you're just like, I don't know what any of these buttons do. So definitely when you start using it, give yourself time to figure that out. I started playing with it about 3 weeks before I published my podcast. And I really just had to basically run into problems and then use the online shout out to the online manual. Thank you for the people who wrote that. It was very helpful.
I was going to ask, I would
And
have gone
then
straight to YouTube videos, but that's nice that they have a manual.
it's a very comprehensive manual, and I very much appreciate it. So yes, I've been using Audacity, which saved us some money so that we could afford to buy the hosting site, um, which we're using Podbean. There are a ton of hosting sites. I don't necessarily recommend one over the other, uh, but that makes it easier to publish the podcast and push it out to the podcatchers. So like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other things.
I think Stitcher is the one that I have on my phone. Is that a podcatcher?
It is a podcatcher. Yes, it
I've
is.
never used or heard that term before. Very cool. And you got support from Durham Tech, like you said. Um,
Mhm.
they helped you out with purchasing the equipment and
Yes, we were able to use money from the Durham Tech Foundation. So thank you to everyone who donated to the Durham Tech Foundation. We very much appreciate that because we couldn't necessarily use the regular budget money for this because that has to go towards databases and books and all the other things that our library has to have for the academic programs, um, and things like trying to start a podcast don't necessarily
Mhm.
fall into that.
And you all have an Instagram page too. I've
We
been enjoying
do.
following that. Very cool and impressive feature. Um,
Thank
so
you.
you've had one great podcast on voting with, was it a member of staff at Durham Tech was your subject?
Yes, Erin Riney.
Mm.
She is the director of student engagement, and she's incredibly knowledgeable, as you know, about voting. So she was a great person to interview. She does a lot of work on campus with students, trying to educate them about like down ballot races and getting word out how to register and early voting. And she's really great.
Yeah, yeah, very knowledgeable. What sort of feedback have you had from the students, faculty, anyone, staff?
I have received a lot of really positive feedback from the faculty and staff. I got several emails the day of the podcast publishing from people saying that they enjoyed listening to it, they learned some things, um, and I've talked to several people after. Most of my feedback has been from faculty and staff so far, because I think students maybe haven't listened to it yet. Hopefully that will change as we move forward and do more outreach and publicity for the podcast. And hopefully they will listen because the podcast is for them. And I I think that as I get more guests on, because studies have shown that students tune in for other students. They want to hear from other students.
Yeah,
So the next interview I'm doing is with the head of the Student Government Association, the president of the Student Government Association. And so I'm hoping that students will be like, oh, that's a fellow student, and tune
that'll be
in.
great to get the student perspective, especially during this COVID crisis time and all of us having to do a lot of adjusting. Which brings me to your editing process. I'm sure it's been challenging. Once you record, say, a program, what's your process after that? Your next steps?
Well, the once I record the program, and for recording, I'm using a website called Clean Feed because all recording is remote right now, since we don't want two people in a small, uh, you know, room together right now.
Sure.
Um, so I'm using a website called Clean Feed, and it records for free, and you can download that recording. And then I put it into Audacity and I edit myself and I edit the other person.
So
And
the
then I
recording
combine them.
software is different from the editing software.
Yes,
Okay.
you can record with Audacity, but I have not been, because it doesn't really work with remotely.
Yeah.
Um, so I've been recording with Clean Feed. And then when you start editing in Audacity, you will quickly realize that your own voice is super annoying, and you have all kinds of like verbal tics that you're like, oh, how can anyone stand to listen to me talk? So you edit out all of the ums and the likes and the I make this noise. Yes, that I edit out that, and it's so much. It's so often and frequent that I can recognize the waveform now, even after only having edited one podcast, because
Oh
I do
my
it all the
gosh.
time.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm not the only person who does it all the time, but it was just, once I started noticing it, you can't not notice it anymore.
That sounds
So
like a lot of work. How many hours would you say you spent editing one
so the
podcast?
first podcast I did clocked in at about 22 minutes, and I
Mhm.
probably spent 4 or 5 hours editing.
Oh my gosh.
Um, Maybe
Well,
even a little bit more.
it sounded
Uh,
very professional to me and clean and beautiful and it had music in it and everything. Tell us about the
Thank
music.
you. The music was done for me for free by my stepbrother, Robert Isaacs. He was like, "Oh, I'll do music for your podcast," and I was like, "Really? Thank you very much."
That's great because
Was
there's
very
probably
happy with it.
copyright issues with using other types of music or
Yeah, there is some music out there that's like public domain music, but it's not necessarily podcasting music. So
got to find
I
the
was
right
very lucky
fit.
to, yeah, I was very lucky that he was able to do that for me and like volunteered.
Oh, that's great.
Um, yes. So I think that my editing process will get faster as
Sure.
I, get better at it. I know what I'm doing more. But definitely you're going to need time to edit. Um, so definitely leave yourself that time. And I would highly recommend doing a test podcast first, because
Okay.
I did that with a coworker. We talked about baking for like 40 minutes,
Nice.
and then I edited it for about 30. I edited the first 30 minutes to see how long it would take me. And that first podcast sounded terrible. I made all kinds of mistakes, but I was really glad that I made them on the test podcast and not the actual real interview podcast.
Lessons learned. So that's your big tip. Any other takeaways you want to share with the viewing public?
Um, if
Practice.
you're thinking, definitely practice, definitely leave yourself time.
Mhm.
Um, it's if this wasn't COVID times, I would be struggling a lot more to fit it in with my regular job duties. Because there aren't as many students as on campus, I can be in my office working on it for hours at a time, and it's
Yeah.
not as big of a deal as it would have been if the regular amount of students were on campus.
On the reference desk,
Um,
answering questions as you do.
yes, teaching instruction classes and preparing for them and stuff like that. So it's it's going to be, hopefully, when eventually students are
Mhm.
able to come back to campus, hopefully I'll be better at it and we can make that happen a little bit easier.
Well, we will definitely have to have another conversation about baking because I have recently made apple pie bread, pumpkin spice granola, and oh, oh, my favorite, chocolate pumpkin loaf. But we'll save that for after the. It's really good and it's
Oh,
vegan.
that sounds amazing.
Hmm hmm
I want that. Please
Okay,
bring that
I'll
to
send you
me.
the recipe. It's online. It's great. And as I promised, we have to talk about books at least a little bit because we are librarians. Is there any short list of books you're reading or interested in reading these days or read recently?
I am currently in the middle of two books. One, I have them here. The first one is All We Can Save.
That's
Truth,
great.
Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. And it's amazing. It's so good.
Good
Like,
recommendation.
I can't even tell you how good this book is. I have been reading, it's a sort of intense book, so I've been reading it like little pieces at a time, one essay a night kind of thing, so it's taking me a while, but every single one I want to just like take a highlighter and, you know, I feel so inspired and afraid and
Yeah.
you want to
Yeah.
get up and do something and comforted because it's full of a book of people trying to help and change the world.
That's wonderful. Oh, great. It's going on my list.
The
Thanks.
other book I'm reading is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. And it's a Faustian bargain story where she basically makes a deal for eternal life, but nobody remembers her. So as soon as she stops talking to someone, basically they forget who she is. And so she can't really make an impact on the world. And until one day she meets someone who does remember her. So
Wow.
it's pretty good
Interesting.
so far.
Interesting. Oh, that sounds good. I'm reading The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabelle Wilkerson. I just read Cast, so I felt like I needed to go back. And I don't have the book because it's an audiobook, so I could show you my phone, but that's been great. And You Think It, I'll Say It by Curtis Sittenfeld, which is a book of short stories for one of my book
Nice.
clubs. I also finished Circe by Madeline Miller, which I've
Oh,
been
I like
recommending
that
to
one.
everyone. A wonderful book, sort of bringing to life and filling out the Greek gods and where they intersect with human mortals. It's wonderful, and it's a really, really good audiobook too.
I love audiobooks. The most recent audiobooks book that I listened to was called American Cheese, and it was about the uh, a dive into the world of artisan cheese in America. Um, and it was very entertaining and very interesting. I learned some things about cheese. The way cheese is described is sometimes amazing, and you're like, "Oh, that sounds so good." And then sometimes they use words like diaper, and I'm just like, "No, that does not sound good. I do not want to eat that cheese." Um, so, and the local creamery Boxcar Handmade Cheese was on was in the book for very briefly, only on like one page, but
Oh,
so yeah.
nice. That's great. Well, I want to give you my deepest heartfelt thanks so much for doing this program. We'll record it and have it up on the website for Durham County Library. Again, Courtney Bippley from Durham Tech, reference librarian. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon, I hope.